Yeah.
Okay, just hang on a second. You're not going on.
Yeah. Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this press conference. So we're going to start pretty quickly. I'm sure you're quite keen to hear the reactions to the text. So we've got 4 speakers with us today. We'll start with Jerry Arantes from the Center for Ecology and Environmental Development, SEED in the Philippines. We have Nama Chowdhury from 350.org, Harjeet Singh from the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and finally Liddy Natpil from the Asians People Movement on Debt and Development. So this is about a reaction to the text that's just published. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Jerry to go first.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks to everyone that's here. We started COP29 with alarm that the outcome of the US presidential elections would deter global climate action. Apparently, the halls of COP29 is already flooded with many Trumps. The US the $250 billion a year is a cruel condemnation to death for the world's vulnerable peoples. It barely begins to cover what developing nations need to adapt to worsening climate impacts, accounts for decades of loss and damage, and mitigate more catastrophic climate chaos. We came here with historic storms, 6 storms in 3 weeks alone in the Philippines. That in itself is climate chaos. This text condemns us all, condemns many Filipinos to death and destruction. We will not allow our communities in the Global South, in particular in the Philippines, will not allow our survival to be dictated by this text. We will not allow this atrocity to be added to the already long list of injustices done to our people by developed nations. The fact that they hid the language on transitioning away from fossil fuel is a slap to many of us who are dying and to many of us in the Philippines who haven't even rebuilt through the 6 storms that have passed. So we join all civil society organizations and communities and movements across the world to condemn the text and condemn the developed nations. What face do they have to show here to say that they are leading climate leadership? This is not climate leadership, but condemnation to all vulnerable peoples of the world.
Thank you, Jerry. And note a correction on Jerry's organization from the description I gave. We'll hand over to Nama now.
Thank you, Stu. In quick reaction to the text, I can say it is disappointing to say the very least. As Jerry has said, it is a slap, it is an insult, it is shocking that we are at this state now. The rich countries are basically gambling with the lives of people in developing nations and in small island states. Let's contextualize this. In Baku, ministers have been negotiating the price of survival against climate change. Every decision made now is going to determine whether the Global South has the resources to adapt, recover, and transition or not. They've published a $250 billion per year figure. And they're talking about mobilizing the rest. We have been saying from the start of this COP that both the quantum and the quality of the finance that is agreed here are critical. It is super important for us to hold that line of 1 trillion and to remind them of what is at stake. The new text includes a proposal for a provision of climate finance. 250 billion per year in climate finance by 2035, but this is far, far too low. Assessed against demands from civil society, we saw countries from the global south and the G77 asking for 600 billion. Even that was a concession, a compromise. For them to reject that and drop it even further to 250 billion, it quite literally makes me tremble with anger. It's up to us to ask the question now, how can this be called justice? As the world watches what needs to be the final day of this year's climate talks, the agreement we came here for remains elusive. Ambition that we called for in the morning is still missing. Justice requires 1 trillion per year, not vague promises, not compromises, not reduced sums. Every subtraction from that is a blatant betrayal of the global south. The G77 has already compromised. It's time for rich nations to stump up. It's as simple as that. Rich nations have not yet shown the courage that they need to show to deliver to the debt they owe for the climate crisis that they have caused, that their extractive activities have caused in the last so many decades. All eyes are now on the European Union and on countries like the UK. We need bold action from them to phase out fossil fuels. This is non-negotiable. But focusing only on this while neglecting the critical need for real climate finance is sheer hypocrisy. How are they going to afford it? You cannot demand a transition without providing the resources that make it possible for those most impacted by climate change. I can speak more about where the money might come from, but I suspect our colleagues on the panel will look to that. But I will say this, that it needs to be public finance, it needs to be non-concessional, it needs to come from tax. And we have already said how taxing the ultra-rich is one clear source, right? I'm going to hand over now for you to hear from our other panelists, but we are happy to give you a bit more in follow-up if required.
Thanks, Nama. And Harjeet, over to you.
Thank you. I must say the trust has been shattered. This proposal from developed countries of providing only $250 per year is a disgrace, to say the least. Developed countries are fully aware of the cost of climate action, which is running into trillions of dollars annually, yet they had the audacity to offer this paltry amount. And to add insult to the injury, this includes loans. And if you read it carefully, it says MDBs are going to be multiplying their funds, which means more loans. The $100 billion target had 69% loans. There's a passing reference to grants, which means that there is no commitment to how much money is going to be provided in the form of grants. There is no reference to fossil fuels, just a passing remark on just transition. If you don't commit grant-based finance, if you don't provide clear support to developing countries, they will not be able to transition away from fossil fuels. And if this is how money is going to be provided, we are all doomed. And we urge developing countries to stand firm and reject this. It is a stand for dignity. No deal is better than a bad deal. I must repeat, no deal is better than a bad deal. And especially when it disrespects those bearing the brunt of a crisis they did not create. And developed countries have a chance to either update the number or just back out, and we must reject it and come back at some other time to come up with a deal that is commensurate to the needs on ground. Because people are suffering. They need money to move away from fossil fuels. They need money to adapt to the rising climate impacts and also recover from climate disasters that they are already facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Harjeet. Finally, Liddy Natpil from the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development.
Thank you. We must say that this was worse than what we imagined would be the worst. We didn't think they'd stoop this low to insult us. $100 billion in 2009 was already an outrageous, cruel joke. But that $100 billion in 2009 in real terms is even more valuable than $250 billion in 2035. So we're ending up in a far worse situation than we were before this NCQG process. This $250 billion a year is not even just the funds from developed countries to developing countries as the $100 billion was. It's all sorts of finance mixed together. And the words to be led by developing countries also clearly means they mean to count also finance flows from developing countries to developing countries. There's many, many very clever words in this text to get away with a lot of the things that developed country parties were insisting and could not be budged. And this is clearly a text that is meant to cater only to what the developed country wants, and a gamble that some of the developing country parties would agree to this because they would feel that they would rather leave Baku with peanuts than with nothing. So I echo the call for our developed country party governments to reject this text and demand at the very least that they come back with something that is at least several times closer to what is right and what is just. One of the things that it also insults us in this entire process is that they are reducing us to beggars. We are not begging. This climate finance is what is owed us, and we want our developing country governments to remember that. We cannot accept any more insults. We cannot accept this text. And as Harjeet said, we'd rather fight for something much better for another year than leave Baku with something that doesn't even have a shred of decency. So we call on the developed country parties to demand or walk away. Thank you.
Thank you, Liddy. So we're going to take some questions, not too many, because we've also got other spokespeople available to speak outside in Spanish and Portuguese. So we want to give a chance for more languages, but we'll take some questions now, maybe 3 at a time. Don't be shy. 1 at a time, if need be.
Stuart, may I add just one thing?
Please, Liddy, yeah,
If
come
no
on,
one is
fill the gap.
asking any questions. So we're here with the Global Gas and Oil Network, and we're here as energy transition campaigners, campaigning for a rapid transition out of fossil fuels to 100% renewable energy without resorting to false solutions. And we're here to say that this bad NCQG text is going to sabotage that effort, that global effort to transition out of fossil fuels as rapidly as we can in a just and equitable way. Because not only does the developing countries need this climate finance to address our loss and damage and our needs for adaptation and building resilience, we need this to be successful in our energy transition to move away from fossil fuels to 100% renewable energy in as just, equitable, and rapid manner as possible. And we are not going to do that just for ourselves. We're doing that for the whole of humanity because we need all the efforts everywhere by everyone in order to address the causes of climate change successfully. So they are sabotaging that effort for something that is only in their interest and is not even in the interest of their own citizens. So we must really condemn the governments of these developed countries, that they are condemning the rest of humanity, not only the people of the Global South, but everyone.
And I'd like to add a note of hope, if I may, to it.
And then we've got a question. Yeah,
The
please,
silver
Norman.
lining, and particularly important for our friends in the press to know this, the silver lining is that this text can and should still be edited, right? There is still room to recover what we've lost. They have done some backsliding on the language on grants. That's unacceptable. We need to be pushing for text like that to be restored, and we need to be pushing for the goal to be reached no matter what. So I want to stress that just so that we don't lose sight of the possibility that's still here.
Okay, so I think we have one question here. If you'd like to stand up and... Do we have a microphone?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Fernandez from EcoBusiness. Just a question for the panel. Given this weak outcome, although not final, there have been calls even before this text for reform for the COPs, for it to transition from at least from negotiation to implementation. What kind of reform would you like to see on the road to Brazil?
What kind of reforms? Want to answer that?
Up to you to. We each might have an answer to
Well,
that.
let's go from Liddy backwards. So Liddy, do you want to go first?
What is fundamentally needed is not just cosmetic changes in the processes here. I don't know about what kind of reform specifically that we need in the process, but we do need to address the hugely inequitable power relations between the governments of the developed countries and the governments of the developing countries. It's hugely inequitable because we do know in our economic system, they hold the economic power and they use that to leverage their political power. Now, what kind of reforms in these processes do we need in order to mitigate that somewhat or to compensate that for somewhat? We need the processes to be more democratic, to be more enabling of developing country parties and civil society, in fact, also, to be able to somehow make up for that hugely imbalanced power. For instance, what we see here at the COPs is that developing countries can barely manage to keep up with so many negotiations, right? While developed countries come with their more than 100 negotiators, or, well, that's the US, but like at least 50 negotiators for European countries, for instance, as compared to some of the small island states who have, what, 5 people, 10 people? I mean, there has to be an empowering measures for developing countries to be able to, at the very least, participate in these processes with some kind of, boost up because of already very disempowered situation. And for civil society, we need to have more democratic space in here to be able to speak up loudly and more strongly. One of the absurd things here is we have very little spaces to participate and engage. So yes, many different reforms, but we really need to, I guess, discover how developing countries can find their collective strength as more powerful than, and put up with the kind of bullshit that they get from this processes. Sorry about that. Thank you.
I can add a few points, and totally agreeing with what Liddy said. I think we need to recognize what is good in this system. All countries are equal. This is the United Nations space. We agreed on a consensus-based system because it is good, because if all countries agree on a common direction, but based on equity and justice, it works. So definitely we need to reform the system. As Liddy said, we should not allow fossil fuel lobbyists to walk around in these spaces. We should not allow petro-states to host these COPs. We should not allow countries who have human rights violations and don't provide civic space to host these COPs. These are the kind of reforms we need. But we also need to protect what is good, which is all countries are equal, and we apply equity and justice, and that is extremely important. But let's also understand the space is not as bad as certain countries have made it like this. They've not allowed any conversation to happen. If the United States, the European Union, and Australia, Canada, Norway, all these big polluters had recognized and acknowledged their responsibility, the same space could have been used much better. The fact is they're not allowing this space to function. Yes, we need to fix certain things, but we also need to make sure that people who have vested interests, governments who are in bed with the fossil fuel industry must be called out. They are far more problematic than this system, which we definitely need to reform. And that's exactly the reason we are calling for a new global framework in the form of a fossil fuel treaty, because we know these fossil fuel lobbies and industries are not going to allow us to have a comprehensive conversation on what is needed to move away from fossil fuels, which should be complementary to Paris Agreement. Look at how much time it took us to arrive at a decision at COP28 to even mention fossil fuels, and look at the current text. It doesn't even refer to those words. Look at how it is doing injustice to the whole idea of just transition, which is so fundamental to help countries to move away from fossil fuels. So this space is not going to help us. We have been trying our level best to boost all the opportunities that we have, be it mitigation work program, be it just transition work program, and we still want these processes to deliver. But if you look at the issue comprehensively, we need something far more. We need something new, which is not based on this system, and where vulnerable countries and countries who are stuck with the fossil-based economy but have shown the courage to move out of it take a lead, like we have seen the leadership from Colombia and Timor-Leste and the likes. That's what is needed.
Okay. Thank you, Harjeet. So we've got just under 4 minutes left, so I'm going to take some more questions if there are any. Yeah, over here.
Since we're at a press conference, I just want to make sure I've got the main messages here. We've got calls for higher finance pledges, more emphasis on grants, strong language on transitioning away from fossil fuels, more equity and justice in the balance of power in these spaces. Those with vested interests in fossil fuels must not be allowed to lobby here. Have I missed anything?
We need grants and not loans.
Okay. Any other additions?
And the number needs to go up considerably. So 250 billion is not cutting it. We need 1.3 trillion in grants, not loans.
Jerry or Liddy, anything to add? Okay. Any more questions from the floor?
Hi. You said 1.3 trillion in grants fully. Right now it's 250. Is there a window in the middle that you think where maybe people can arrive, which will be acceptable to both sides?
Well, like we've been stressing, the real cost of this is paid in the South. Every time we negotiate down, we are basically sacrificing more. Every subtraction is an insult. They've already dropped it from 600 billion to 250 billion. How do we have the heart to go back to countries that are on the brink of collapse and say that they must now compromise and make do with this? That's the unacceptability of it. And really, I am, like Mary Robinson said yesterday, a prisoner of hope. I'm a prisoner of hope as well. So I'm clinging to the silver lining that there is still room to go before this is gavelled. And in that room, I'm hoping to see us make that 1.3 trillion in grants and not loans.
And correction, it's not 250 billion in grants. That's not what they're talking about.
It's provision
here.
funds.
It's 250 billion, all mixed up. Grants, loans, public, private. It's not about grants, 250 billion.
Okay, thank you, Liddy. Thank you, Nama.
Thank you for asking that to allow us to clarify.
Any final questions? We've got 1.5 minutes. 1 minute. Okay, quick question, very quick answers. Can we have a microphone down the front, please?
Hi, Marielle from Energy Inter. Quick question, what's going to happen next? Is there going to be more negotiations? Do you expect one more draft, 2 more drafts? How do you see things going? Thank you.
It shouldn't matter. Sorry, I'm jumping.
Well, you want to go and Harjeet next, so 15 seconds each.
It shouldn't matter. This is not a game where we call time whether or not a goal has been scored. It is so important that we achieve the goal. And that's what we think we need to keep pushing for. So we are going to hold that line.
But in terms of what the presidency says is going to happen, they're going to take in comments for this new text and then come out with a last text sometime maybe tonight or early morning tomorrow. But we're saying that they shouldn't stop until we walk out and not accept the deal here, or that there is an acceptable deal.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We've got to cut it short. Just to stress, people will be outside to take questions. We've also got questions, people that can answer in Spanish and Portuguese. Thank you for coming. Round of applause for the panelists, please.